I'm in my house, and this is Jillian Cannon, who is in Lambertville on the day of 9/11/2001. Can you tell me a little bit about your personal experience with 9/11?
I was at a meeting at the Lambertville Inn. I was meeting with a lot of people who had just flown in the previous day from Europe, and a lot of them actually had relatives who were in the air at the time of that. So we had just finished breakfast, and we had taken coffee into the meeting room, and we were sitting there just getting ready to start the meeting when we heard the hotel staff outside the room making a lot of noise. So somebody went out to ask them to quiet down, and they said there had been some disaster taking place, but they didn't really know very much about what had happened. So that's when we first learned about the 9/11 incident.
Okay. What did you do with the remainder of your day after you learned about it?
Well, after we heard about the first aeroplane, we assumed there was just some accident had taken place. So we went back into the meeting room to try to start the meeting. But there was a lot of people who were very anxious because they had relatives who were flying that day, so they wanted to have more information. So we left the meeting and we went into where the hotel staff were, and they had the big screen TV on in the restaurant. So we actually just sat and watched that and just watched really the events of the day unfold.
Okay. And so you say that when you first learned of the incident of 9/11, you didn't think it was terrorism, did you?
Absolutely not. We assumed there was some freak accident taking place, and we assumed that it was a air traffic control accident that had actually caused the plane to crash.
Okay.
So we had no idea whatsoever, but then everything just seemed to happen really quickly after that. The second crash, and then news of the third crash, and then they were actually trying to get all the aeroplanes to come down from the air, and people in the room were very frantic trying to understand where their relatives were, and we were starting to think then there was something going on. But what we were worried about was that how many aeroplanes were involved. Was it going to be 5, 10, 20, 30? The Europeans were all frantically trying to call home to see if anything was happening in Europe, and nobody could get an outside line on their cell phone. The cell phone signals were completely just jammed up, and so they couldn't really get through to anybody.
Okay. Did you actually know anybody who was in New York at the time, or were any of the other people at your meeting? Did they know anybody?
There was a number of people who had family or friends in New York that day, but not necessarily at the World Trade Center. My brother had been at the World Trade Center 2 weeks earlier, and we never really were very sure where he was. He commuted back and forth from London to the US on a regular basis. So I was trying to call my dad to see where my brother was, because I was concerned as to where he would be. But when he visited New York, he did go to the World Trade Center.
Okay. And how has this experience with 9/11 changed you, changed your opinions of terrorism and that sort of thing?
Well, it was just a very scary day, but for us, having come from the UK, the experience was a little more, it was not as unusual as I think it was for people who had lived here in the United States. So we had grown up with terrorism in the United Kingdom. We lived with the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, who were constantly doing terrorist actions. So it was something we were familiar with to some extent, but it wasn't really something that had ever happened here, I think, in the US. So I think what we were left feeling, what I was left feeling, was just this sense of kind of being grateful for what you do have. And I had that feeling several times before. So there'd been one incident when my husband had been at Heathrow Airport when there was a supposed IRA bombing threat, and they closed the airport down, and he was actually in the airport, and we couldn't get to speak to him. I didn't know where he was, I didn't know what was happening, and the airport was closed for, I'm not sure how long. When I remember back now, it seems like forever, but I think it was probably just several hours. And at that time I was supposed to go and fly to a meeting and do some work and then come back home several days later. And on that day I just flew straight home because I really wanted to just see him, because it had been a very frightening experience knowing that he was right in the middle of the terrorist situation. So for me, 9/11 brought a lot of those memories back around thinking how we had coped through all the IRA bombings, and I think just made us want to stay closer to home.
Okay, thank you for your time.